and I applied the pads just as it was instructed. And I delivered the shock. And after that first shock, his eyes opened. And when I looked into his eyes, he was gone. There was no life. Following the wrong things. I was around the wrong crowd of people. I was deep in a porn addiction. I was deep in smoking weed. And the music was speaking to me. It was convicting me. Do not be anxious. Why do I worry so much? Why do I worry about tomorrow? Today's troubles are enough of its own. He started telling me about the gospel, and I was resonating with every single word. And he asked me at that moment, Paul, do you want to give your life to Christ? The moment everyone's been waiting for, the year how I came to Roanoke, Virginia from California. But before I started off, I want to open it up with a piece of scripture. I wrote it down that really touched my heart. Romans 8:29-30. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. That scripture really hit home for me, because in this time for me in Roanoke, everything that he told me came to be. Everything that he promised me came to be, not just for my family, but my time he was spent. And it started summer of 2019, where I witnessed my first heart attack working at a YMCA back home in Redlands, California. This changed my life forever. I was working in a morning shift that I had picked up from a coworker who couldn't work that day, and he works from 5:30 in the morning to 9:30 in the morning. And in this time, I was just working the regular day. I thought it was a regular shift, and at the end of it, I was closing out, going somewhere outside of the building, and I learned from someone else that there was a man who had a heart attack in the gymnasium. So when I heard that, I ran straight into the gym, and there he was, a man just laying on the floor, surrounded by people, and one of our personal trainers giving them CPR. And I ran over and was surveying the scene, like what was going on. And there was a lady on the phone with EMS, and in that phone call, I heard them say, "Get the first aid kit and get the defibrillator." So once I heard that, I went and got the defibrillator and kneed down next to the man, and I applied the pads just as it was instructed, and I delivered the shock. And after that first shock, his eyes opened, and when I looked into his eyes, he was gone. There was no life. And when I saw that, I was shocked. I was like, "Well, okay, hold on, what's going on?" And at that moment, I didn't have time to think, because we still had to keep going. And I delivered a second shock. After that second shock, that's when EMS came in and took over. And when they took over, they pronounced him dead at the scene. And that moment was crazy to me, because I saw how fragile life was, how quick someone can go. And when I look back at that moment now, I see now that the Lord was using that to wake me up and tell me, "Paul, you need to shake it up, because you have not been doing right in life." I was following the wrong things. I was around the wrong crowd of people. I was deep in a porn addiction. I was deep in smoking weed. I was partying. I was doing all these things that I shouldn't be doing. And I was in my last year of college as well, going into my last year of college, rather, or last quarter. Following that day, I just completely suppressed it. I had intention of just reliving that day. And that just kind of captures my entire 22 years of living, of just suppressing things and not really talking about it and not really letting it out. And it wasn't until a few weeks later after that incident had occurred where on my way home from dropping off a friend, I was driving back home and I saw this funeral service going into a church, and I saw these people bringing a casket into the funeral. Now, before I get deeper into that, the man ended up living, and we ended up saving his life off of what we did, and that was just one of the most positive. That reassured me, but it still haunted me. But after that service, after that church service, after seeing the funeral and the casket going into the church, I had a breakdown. And the first people I ran to, and I remember it to this day, was I went to my mom, who was working at the time she's a high school teacher. And I went outside of her school calling like, hey, like I'm unstable. Like I can't do anything. Like I'm losing it. And there was no answer. The next person I called was my stepdad. There was no answer. And the only person I could turn to was my older brother, whom our relationship at that time was very, very broken. And I came in and I told him, like, hey, Isaac, like I'm breaking down. I don't know why. I don't know what's going on inside of me right now. And after that moment, after that day, I had that breakdown. I checked myself into therapy to let everything out. And that's when I had to open up every trauma, everything that I've been through, and really dig deep into what I had gone through. And since I had been suppressing it for so long, I had a lot to talk about. And in that time in therapy, I learned that I was in a cycle. I was living in a cycle, and it was very apparent to me in the relationship I was in at that time. After seeing like these patterns in my life, I was like, oh, something needs to change. And when I decided to make that change, I was going into my last quarter of college. And going into my first day of my last quarter of 2019, on my first day, I entered into the classroom, fresh out of a breakup the day before, changing that pattern and breaking the cycle and saying, like, I'm going to change. I'm going to do something different. And I remember going into that first day of college like, man, I don't want to be here. What am I doing here? Why am I in school? Like, there's no reason for me to be here. I don't even like this kinesiology degree. Like, I'm just doing this because my brother couldn't do it. I'm just doing this because my mom wants me to do this. But this isn't really what I want to do. And in that time, I knew, like, one, that my brother hadn't finished it, and two, that it was my mom's biggest dream for one of her kids to finish college. So, I buckled up and I said, I'm going to finish this. I'm going to do it. But in those times, this was also when I was heavily leaning on porn, when I was heavily leaning on smoking weed. And when I say smoking weed, I was going into class 6 a.m. before 7 a.m. Smoke. After class, smoke. Before going to bed, smoke. That's how I was coping with everything. That's how I wanted all this pain to just go away at the same time. And at the same time, I was also going to therapy. So I'm over here doing two things. And it was a very dark time for me during those years, during that last quarter of college. I was not focused. I was just getting by without really having a drive. But it was also during those moments in my last quarter of college where I found a music passion, where the Lord, I see it now, where the Lord revealed to me my passion for music that I do today, where He brought me a guitar that my brother had lent me. And when He lent me that guitar, I started just picking it up right away. I was like, oh, and I had put this guitar down for 10 plus years. My last lesson was like, I want to say around 10 years old. And that was my only lesson. And I remember just not caring, not really wanting to do it. And I was like, and a lot of that was due to me listening in on my brother's lesson. And I just wasn't interested because he was telling the instructor, hey, this Paul can't play. All he does is strum the guitar. And that tore me up as a kid. And from that day on, I put down the guitar until that quarter, my last quarter, in the middle of all that darkness. I picked up the guitar and played it, and I'm like, I like this. This feels right. This is the first thing that feels right in my life. And I didn't fully commit to it yet, but I just started playing every now and then and just strumming, learning some chords every now and then. And it wouldn't be too long after where my brother came. He's like, hey, Paul, I'm taking this guitar back. It's mine. I was like, okay, fine. And gave it back to him. Later on that same day, and this is where it was confirmed to me, where my stepdad, without having knowledge that my brother took my guitar, came in and said, Paul, I got you a guitar. Here's a brand new guitar. Here you go. And at that moment, I was like, oh, snap. Yeah. This is it. This is it. But I was still in the middle of college, and I still was going through some things, so I didn't really pick it up as much. But I knew this is where I was heading. And a lot of things would just start falling in line during that last year of college. And Thanksgiving break, during my, again, last quarter of college, I come to Virginia to meet my stepdad's side of the family. And when we got here, we were just passing Roanoke. And we stopped at a restaurant called Blue Five, which is now called Too Chill. And I didn't think anything of Roanoke, to be honest. I was just like, whatever, it's just another city. I don't really care for it too much. I'm not really drawn to this. I don't know. Like, I'm just here to meet my stepdad's side of the family. And it wasn't until I got to Bassett, we drove down to Bassett, where I was captured by the beauty of Virginia. And not just the beauty of Virginia, I felt something was calling me here, but I didn't really know it yet at the time that it was the Lord. I knew, I told myself, I said, I'm gonna come back someday. Now, when I told myself that, I was like, hey, I'm gonna come back like 10 years down the line, 5 years, not soon. But it wasn't too long after where right after college, I came here, but to build up to that point. But when I came back home, I knew this is where another spiral happened in my life. And I was still into weed. I was still into pornography. I was still into those things. I was just using them to cope still. And I was still in therapy, but I had no clue how to really speak about this addiction, these two things, and tell my therapist, because I'm like, I don't know if she'll understand these things. And I was insecure. I was very insecure about speaking about these things. It's very hard to talk about this addiction. And it's funny, now I'm here speaking to the camera about a porn addiction. But yeah, that spiral led me, after I returned home, led me to before I get into that part, I was going, this is where the Lord started revealing himself more to me. And I had gone into an AutoZone one day, and I had bought this cross that they had there. That was also just a scent, one of those things that you put around your car, and it gives a nice scent. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna take this. I don't know why, but it just seems interesting to me. And little did I know, that cross, a little bit further down the line, was going to be the changing point of my life. And this is where I come to the park one day to just smoke. And I'm sitting down in my car, and after doing my thing, after smoking, I was listening to music. And then I was holding on the cross while I was doing it. And at that time, it felt like something was speaking to me. And the music was speaking to me. It was convicting me of everything. And at that moment, I just started breaking down, crying. Like, what is going on right now? Why am I crying? And at this time, I was going through a very spiritual phase. So I was in the meditation. I was sitting down every single day and just practicing breathing, of course, which I learned through therapy. And after that breakdown, I just went straight home. And it was around 8 or 9 p.m. when I got home, and I sat down and I just started meditating from that time all the way till 1 to 2 a.m. And in that time, that's when the Lord had spoken to me and was telling me, Paul, you need to be in Virginia right now. I can't tell you everything right now, but that's where you gotta be. And after that day of meditation, I went to bed that night like, what the heck just happened? And that following day, that's when purity just kicked my life. I stopped getting into porn. I stopped getting into weed. I was just like, I need to step away from that because I got to figure out what just happened. And I still hadn't picked up the Bible. I still wasn't picking up the Bible. I'd open up a verse every now and then and just look into it. I started with Matthew, and oh man, I can't remember the exact verse, but it's Matthew chapter 6, where it tells me, do not be anxious. Why do I worry so much? Why do I worry about tomorrow? Today's troubles are enough of its own. And I took that and ran with it. I'm like, yeah, this is right. This is right. The Lord revealed to me the next move through my stepfather. And I told him what I had gone through. And I told him, like, I also wanted to pursue this music passion, this music dream of mine. And I told him I wanted to go to Virginia to do it. And he said, Paul, in his words, Paul, if you want to do music anywhere, go to Roanoke. In his words, go to Roanoke. And from there, I was like, okay, that's the spot. That's it. And the very next, I can't say the very next day, but shortly following that time period, I bought a plane ticket in the morning and said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it. I bought a plane ticket. And this is all still during that last quarter of college, 2019 to 2020, early 2020. And I had gotten that plane ticket. I knew where I was going. Now I had drive. And this is where I finished off college strong, on a strong note. Like, I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna go pursue this purpose of mine that God is calling me to do. And once I had booked that flight, that's when things just started falling into place. I found a guitar instructor who, the moment he heard me play, said, Paul. He didn't say Paul. He looked at my stepdad and he said, he's going to be a rock star someday. He has a love for music that's different. And this is coming from a guy who had a lot of experience playing in big stages. And to hear that from him was like very encouraging to me and very uplifting. And now I see it now. That was the Lord speaking through him. And I was blown away. And I kept going. I was like, okay, I'm going to keep playing this guitar and keep doing my thing. And then the time would come after graduation where it was time for me to start getting ready for this move. And this is when I started talking to my pops, telling him, hey, what am I going to do? Like, I have no connections out there. And the only connection that we had was, my stepdad's side of the family, but they were up in Maryland at the time. They go up and down. And this is where his cousin, who was just so happened to be passing through Roanoke, was telling my stepdad, like, hey, I'll help him out. I'll find him a job. I'll find him not a place to stay, but like here, I'll tell him where if it's a good spot to stay. But the job is what she helped me with, and I applied back home, got all my stuff ready, and I found an Airbnb as well back home, just looking up these places, and I packed up my suitcase, my one suitcase, and a guitar, and I said, let's go. Got on that plane, August 9th. Well, no, not August 9th, August 8th, and flew. And it's the reason I say August 9th is because on August 8th, I had flown into Charlotte, and still don't know why to this day. It'll come later down the line, but I had miscommunication with the people on the airplane. The I don't know what they're called, the stewards, and they had told me, "Hey, your guitar is probably at the checkout," because I didn't find it. And at the time, I was like, "Oh, like I thought it was supposed to be waiting for me right here." Like, no, it's over there. So I left and started running out because I had another flight to catch like an hour after that, or not even an hour, less than an hour. And I ran out to the front to baggage looking for my guitar, and nothing came out. And I was like, oh, snap. Okay, what am I going to do? And I go tell them my situation, and they're like, you're not going to make your flight. You're going to have to stay here for the night. Oh, that was a nice rhyme right there. I ended up finding my guitar in the same spot where you're supposed to pick up your luggage when you give it to them. And I got my guitar, and I'm like, okay, fine, we're getting a hotel for the night. And and I stayed that night. And I had my flight the next morning. We had to rearrange some things. And I flew in to Roanoke August 9th, Sunday morning. And the moment I flew in, it was early morning, 8 or 9 a.m. I got in, got my bags and stuff checked. Like I was all ready to go. And I laid down for a little bit. And I was like, man, I gotta move because I'm not sleepy. So I go to the YMCA that was right next door to my Airbnb. Come to find that they weren't open during this time. And in my mind, I was like, okay, fine. I'm just gonna check out this church that's right next to my Airbnb. And I go into the service. And again, this is 2020, this is peak COVID at the time. When I'm looking back at it, this is, everyone's wearing masks still and all that, masks on the airplane. It was a strange period. But I went into that church and with my gym clothes on, and I come to the end of the service, and that's when I meet Cheryl, who still serves here to this day. Love you, Cheryl. And she's like, hey, what's going on? And I'm like, I don't know. I just kind of came to check out and see what's going on. And I felt drawn here. And she was like, okay, go have a seat right now. And when he's done preaching, I'll introduce you to Pastor Charles. As I'm listening to his message, and I can't remember the message to this day. I've talked to him about it. Like, what is this message? And I resonated with every single word that he was saying at that time. And I was like, oh man, this is, what is this? I feel something moving in me. And after service ends, Cheryl introduces Pastor Charles to me, and he sits down with me, and he's like, hey, what's going on? And I'm like, I felt called here. I don't know why, but everything that you just said up there, like it hit home to me. And he started telling me about the gospel, and I was resonating with every single word. And he asked me at that moment, Paul, do you want to give your life to Christ? And before even saying yes, I just started breaking down crying. And I said, yes, that's what I want to do. And all of a sudden, everything that I had ever felt, all the pain and all that just lifted. And shortly after that, I get welcomed by everyone but from the church. And I remember my buddy Chillin, my mentor to this day, he came up to me and said, "Welcome to the fam, little bro." And from that day on, that's when a lot of things just started happening. And a couple days later, following me giving my life to Christ, I get baptized right away because I told Pastor Charles, like, let's do this. Let's go. I want to get into this full on. And I get baptized, and following that baptism, 2-3 days later, I still hadn't had a job at this point. I applied to that school that my stepdad's cousin told me about, and that she had connections in. And I got a call back from them saying, "Hey, we have a position for you here." And the school that I worked at was called Roanoke Minnick, and it was such an experience for me. But before I get into that experience, I got the call back, and after I got that call back, I received a car from a friend. Because again, all I had was a suitcase and a guitar, and I was living in this Airbnb. And he's like, "Hey, Paul, you can borrow this car. Go ahead, take it. It's all yours for now, and you can use it for whatever your needs are." Then I got this room in this house that I rented out, and this is all in that short 2-week period of time that I was still in that Airbnb, and I hadn't heard back anything at all from the landlord at that house, and my Airbnb time had ended, and I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do now. I can't stay here. And so I booked another Airbnb off of Hardy Road, which is way down in Vinton. And this place now is closed. It's not there anymore when I drove by it. But that's where I stayed for one night. And that one night I got a call back from the landlord. "Hey, can you meet with me today so I can meet you and see like what kind of person you are, so I can know that you can live in this spot." And I meet with him, and right away it's like an instant connection. And he's like, I don't know. And he told me, I remember, and he's like, "I have a good feeling about you." I don't know why, but I think you'll be. I'm okay with having you here. And that's the home that I would stay at for the next 6 to 7 months. And during that time, that was my isolation period of, it was just me. And I still wasn't heavily into the scripture. I wasn't reading as much. I was just going to Sunday services, building my relationships there, getting to know people. But I was still listening to the services. During that isolation was very eye-opening to me, because I was still into the things that I shouldn't be doing, and I was getting all this conviction too. I was still in porn, and I found my way to weed again. and I was just heavy into it. And in that isolation, when I would do it, I would feel the conviction, especially from porn. And I wouldn't know what to do with it. I was like, why am I feeling this way? I don't like it. But whenever I come to a Sunday service, it would just all be uplifted, and I feel good again. But I still wasn't understanding why. After that isolation time in that house, this is when I was looking into other places to live now. And this is where I had met my room, not my current roommate, but my first roommate, Andrew. And love you, Andrew. Great guy. He was in Florida at the time. How we connected was me going to a CrossFit gym one day and me talking to a buddy. He was like, "Hey, Paul, there's this person that I want you to connect with, because he's moving down from Florida and he needs a roommate. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. I want to get out this one bedroom out. It was one room I'm renting because there was just people coming in and out, in and out. There was no consistent person. And little did I know that this man, Andrew, has a heart for the Lord, a true heart for the Lord. And God was putting him in my life to change me. And when I met Andrew, it was the same connection. It was like man, I don't know why, but I like you. And it was the same way with him with me. Like we just got along like that. And we knew right away, oh, let's do it. Let's make the move. And we found an apartment. We moved in together. And we only had a few conversations up to that point before we moved into the apartment. And we just knew. And when I met him in person, right away, connection. And him and I were just bonding right off the start. And this is where I got to really know who he was and where his heart was and how pure of a person this guy was. And we both learned from each other at that time. And now that I'm talking about it, he taught me the importance of family as I was preaching to him how much I miss my family, because I was a year in already. And I was like, man, Andrew, like I miss my family like every single day. You should like be grateful, like to even have them in your life. Like, because when he moved here, it was because he wanted to be away from his family. And after him and I just being roommates for that time, it didn't take him longer than a year to know, Paul, you're like, I'm moving back home. And this man he was on fire. He was on fire for the Lord. And I remember every single morning he would get up at 5 a.m., go to Panera, dive into the scriptures, read the word. And looking at that now, that's where I'm at right now. Waking up every single day, heart on fire, to read some scripture, because that's where I find my joy from. And seeing him do that every single day built something for me. And I would live with him I was living with him during that time, and we'd have conversations, we'd have really good talk, and I got to go attend his church plant that he was going to at the time, called Redemption Church. I laugh because right now, I believe right now, they have some office spaces here at our church. And this spot, it was also a magical place. Like, it was a godly place for me. I went in there, and it was the same way I felt when I met Pastor Charles when I came to the Hill. It's just every word that they said to me just clicked with me. And my time with Andrew would come short, and the Lord would place this very special girl, special friend, and the Lord put her in my life at the right time. She was the image that God was trying to show to me, that the Lord was trying to show to me. The love is patient, love is kind. And she was very patient, very kind to me at every moment, even when I snapped at her. And she continued to hold her hand out to me and help me through my times. And after Andrew had moved out and I was still living in that apartment, that's when she would, like, hey, you gotta start figuring some things out now, because what you're doing right now ain't gonna cut it. So she was giving me that real conversation, that real talk that I needed to hear. hearing her, she helped me grow a lot, not just as a person, but in my faith, seeing how rooted she was, not just her, but also her family. And this is the first time I ever felt a connection to a family, because in my own personal life, I grew up single parallel. I just grew up with my mom, no dad, for the first 8 years of my life. And it was just me and my older brother. And keep in mind, we're not the same. I mean, we are the same. We come from the same mother. And for the first 7 years of my life, and I say 7 because the 8th year is when my stepfather came into my life, I grew up with my brother who hated me for being born. And I see that now because everything he did was just pain for him. He was hurting a lot inside. When I was age 7, I didn't think of it as attempting to take my life at the time. But when I look back at it now, I was attempting to take my life. And I laugh because it's a funny story of how it happened. My mom didn't want to make me some mac and cheese. And in retaliation, I said, I don't want to be with this family anymore. And I went into my mom's car trunk and closed the hatch. And there was no emergency latch at the time. And I remember it was daytime. And if you know California, California's hot. And it was heat time during this year. It was summer, I believe. That's what I can recall. And I was in that trunk till nighttime. And I remember the first 30 minutes of being in that trunk, I had made a mistake. I was like, no, I don't want to do this. Get me out of here. Get me out of here. But I was too late in it. And there was a few opportunities for me to get out via my brother, but I'm not going to get into that one. But at that moment, I just accepted my fate. I was just, you know what, this is it. Fine. I'm going to go to sleep here, and you know what, maybe I just sleep forever. And I go to sleep, and I wake up, next thing I know, to the whole community of Redlands looking at me, opening the trunk, and I see the shock on their faces of he was in the car trunk. And what I do, I get up out of the trunk, ignore all those people. I go inside the house and I say, I'm going to bed. I don't want to deal with this. And that was the change. That was also a changing point in my life where the Lord kept me because there was something special that he had in store for me. I didn't know it at the time, of course. That following year, when I was 8, my mom would meet my stepfather to this day, Dwan Kellum. And he would be one of the biggest influences of my life, one of the father figures that I needed in my life. And he would raise me for the next 14 years, but and his way of raising me was just to be there and to just be present when I needed him. I didn't really have too much conversation with him. We didn't talk too much, but he was always present whenever I needed him. And he would tell me when I would make a stupid decision. he was the reason as well as why I have this music passion I have today. But that was at that time. And now I'm changing up the timeline. Fast forward to after my roommate Andrew leaves, and I'm looking for a new place to live. And this is where my new roommate, my current roommate to this day, Daynaz, comes into play in my life. And the same person that introduced me to Andrew, I'll give him a shout to, Hunter, was living with Daynaz. He's like, hey, Paul. And he had recently got engaged, and he was telling me, I want to move out so I can save some money. Is there any way you can take do you need a space to stay? And I'm like, well, funny you say that, because I'm moving out of this place and I do need a space to live in. Daynaz was another person whose heart was on fire for the Lord. And we wouldn't have too much conversations when we first lived with each other. When I first moved in, it was just kind of like a hi and bye. He would go off to work because he had to go early into where he was working at. And when he'd come home, he'd just go to sleep because he was so tired from working. So there wasn't much conversation, but he was the same way as my stepdad. He was present. He was there when we needed to have conversation. My pastor sends out a message to our men of the church about a porn, I don't know what to call it, a healing class, I'll say it was. And that's what I have been looking for all this time. I wanted to heal from this. I wanted to get away from this. And first day of going into that, I wasn't going to talk about my own stuff. I was like, I'm here. You guys know why I'm here already. And I went in there and listened to what everyone was talking about. And it was just a little three session class, a 3 session, I don't know what to call it, 3 session class. And in those 3 sessions, it became something else, where one of my other men of the church led it. And this was called Conquer. And I joined that group, learning more about this addiction. And it was just one of those classes, you can just learn about it. We're not really diving into work or anything. And this is where that turned into Pure Desire. And in that Pure Desire class, that's where in my group of men that I was with, we did work every single week to heal from this, to work through this, and and I was never comfortable speaking about it to people. But now I've gotten to a place after going through that time, going through this class, and we just wrapped up our last session almost this past week. Now I'm here in front of a camera telling whoever is going to see this that Christ led me through a porn addiction and healed me through this. And now I'm feeling freer, as they say in Galatians 5. Christ has set us free. And now I'm over here on fire for the Spirit. On fire for the Spirit. And I thank all the people that were in my life in this time. Because without any of them, I don't know where I would be at. All my brothers lifted me up. All my sisters lifted me up. They were there for me. And now as I'm getting ready to go back home for a new chapter in my life, I'm coming back home with a heart on fire for the Lord. I'm going back home to witness to my family who never believed. And again, that's another part of me where the only believers in my family were my grandparents, which are part of the reason of why I have the faith of a mustard seed. Don't give up. Don't give up. because I've grown up with this from a very young age. And I thought I was never going to get out. But you have to put in the work. If you really want to get out of this, you have to put in the work. Not just with a men's group, but diving into your scripture. Because that's where the real healing is. And this is coming from a person that had no kind of very small faith, very little. This is coming from a person who didn't think he was going to come out. And I overcame. And to this day, I feel freer than I ever have before. Restored, restoration. If there's anything that you guys can pray for me about, it's just being patient with my family and continuing to love them wherever they're at. Continuing to love them wherever they're at. And again, just meet them there and not turn them away from Christ, but lead them to Christ the same way that I was led, with action. Being there with my family, loving my family, and showing them this is the truth. And this is what we need to walk in if we want to see better days. Because if we don't, there's going to be a whole lot of pain coming our way. And I will do everything in my power, everything in the power of Christ, to lead them to being saved. Because I feel, one, not just this music dream of mine, but the Lord kept me because he knew that I was going to be the one to turn my family over. That I was going to be the one to walk in light, as I said in that first piece of scripture that I want to pull up again. Romans chapter 8, verse 29. Verse 29 to verse 30. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. As I'm closing out, to everyone that's come across in this Roanoke times, thank you. Because I would not have been able to do this without any of you. You guys have blessed my life. My name is Paul Villagrana. Sorry, Mom. And thank you for listening to my time. I do play guitar. I still play guitar. But right now I'm in the hip-hop rap lane. Okay. And funny you say that. Next week, I have a song called Redemption coming out, talking about how it says, I want redemption for my times that I was wrong and back home. I want to do right because all my life, I chose wrong, even when I knew what the right was. So now I want redemption. Not to mention all those pretty little things that I never had. Pay attention. I'm painting lessons from above, man. Get the message. I'm giving grace with the love. Man, I hope you get it. I hope y'all understand I got another mission now. I'm working on a better me on the SoundCloud. I painted visions of a better life. I'll show you how. So tune in, grab a seat. Yeah, it's our story now. Not just redemption, but to capture my time here in Roanoke. I have a EP coming out purely, it's just on SoundCloud. That's called The Roanoke Times, which I laughed because earlier I said my Roanoke Times here, and I didn't know it was going to be a reference to right now. But yes, The Roanoke Times, that will be coming out August 9th of the exact same day of when I moved here. I have some very special people on there. And I would love for everyone, whoever's listening to this, to hear it, because I'm lifting up the voices of Roanoke as well, and I'm bringing them back home with me to show how beautiful a place this is. And I'll be back. I'll be back because, like I said, the Lord drew me here, and I can still see myself living here. But right now is my time to go back home.